Spring is the time for plans and projects. Leo Tolstoy. The wait is finally over. We are in spring. It brings us much needed rains here in my town of Southern California. Springtime feels like the reward that Mother Nature gives us after endless patience during the month of winter. I took this footage over the course of this entire season as things were blooming in various stages, and I wanted to show you how everything looks in my garden throughout different stages of spring. The preparation and planning, the anticipation of seeing the first bloom in your garden, and the return of the bird song. All these things kept me going through the winter. I love experimenting with my garden every year in form of different flowers, new vegetables, and more recently trying to grow fruit trees in my garden. It is exciting and extremely rewarding to see the earth come back to life. There's magic everywhere, and I can just feel it in every moment that I spend outdoors, whether it is in my garden or out on my favorite hike. The first flowers to bloom in my garden were these KALANCHOE succulents with their salmon orange colored gorgeous tiny blooms. It was a much needed pop of color after the gray greens of winter. They come in various colors and are a great option for a low-maintenance, drought-tolerant plant. Here you can see the beginnings of the Tucano tulips popping up from the ground. And what a joy these flowers were to grow this year. After an entirely unsuccessful attempt last year, this year was a complete joy. And even though I didn't have 100% success rate, I still enjoyed the process and I learned so much after growing these tulips. I tried out different varieties from different vendors, and the Tucano tulips were from one vendor, along with these avalanche daffodils. In the spring flowers, this avalanche daffodil was the first bloom to pop up. Doesn't it look just gorgeous with its yellow middle and these beautiful white petals? This daffodil, upon blooming, also had another surprise in store for me. It had this beautiful sweet smell to it. I was not expecting it, so it was an amazing surprise. And what a beautiful daffodil to grow in your garden. I would highly recommend this if you're looking to plant daffodils in your garden for next year. Each stem has about 4 to 5 blooms, and they just look so beautiful once all of them are in bloom. Here you can see the Tucano tulips. The amazing part about the Tucano tulips is that it is the same exact variety that comes in these various shades of yellow, orange, and red. It has beautiful striations of green and yellow and orange on the petal itself and are just such a showy and beautiful tulip. As I was growing these, I shared these tulips with so many of my neighbors, and they had never seen something like this. So it was a treat not only for me to grow, but it was such a delight to share this beautiful, gorgeous flower with so many other people and give them a little bit of joy for that day. These pink tulips are JUBILEE tulips, and these tulips have tightly packed petals that are double flowered and look so beautiful. They start off with this greenish outer leaf, and inside, once they start opening, you see that they are bicolored with white middles and dark pink petals, which turn a little bit lighter as they start getting older. The last tulips that I tried this year were these Cretaceous tulips. And this was an interesting experiment because, as you can see, these tulips were coming up with all beautiful buds on them. The leaves looked healthy, and I also had some huge blooms come out of them. I mean, they were enormous. But I noticed that after I had the first few flowers bloom, the other blossoms started to die. And the leaves started to die, and I am not sure whether they got too much water or there was some infection that caused them to start dying all of a sudden, and I lost a lot of these tulips. So I'm a little sad about the fact that I didn't get the whole show, but I still got to enjoy a few of those flowers, and that was still a great experiment to try with. Amongst the flowers, the first rose to bloom in my garden was this Olivia Rose Austin. It is a shrub rose by David Austin Roses. I've had this rose since 2017, since the spring of 2017. So I've had it for 5 years. But for the first 3 years, I had planted it in a small container and it grew really well. And just about 2 years ago, I planted this in the ground. So it's been interesting to see how it's been growing. I feel like all my roses that were in the pots and I planted them in the ground took some time to adjust, but now this spring I feel like they are adjusting a lot better and have shown a beautiful flush of flowers. So this was the first bloom in my garden. These come with these cup-shaped rosettes like you can see, and they're mid-pink in color with a light fruity fragrance. It should bloom right up until the end of November. The next rose right next to it is the Alnwick rose, and this is another beautiful pink rose that I have grown. I love the Alnwick rose because the flowers are beautiful pink in color and cup shape with a really beautiful old rose scent. The growth of this rose is also bushy and relatively upright, as you can see with all the stems. I don't have to stake it. This rose right next to it is the Jubilee celebration, and it has not yet flowered, and you can just see these buds, but once they start blooming, oh, it's a complete delight. And I'll create a different video to show you once all of them are in bloom. So it is an absolute delight to see the Jubilee celebration. The next rose is Princess Anne rose, which has deep pink flowers. They start this beautiful deep rich pink, and sometimes some of them almost look red. If you can see one on the bottom, it looks almost red in color. But then as they start getting older, they start fading into a more richer, just pure pink, and it just is a treat to see these beautiful flowers. I have to say though, I was almost going to take this rose out last year because it didn't bloom as well when it was in the container. I don't know why, and it wasn't blooming as well. And once I planted it in the ground, it didn't bloom at all that season. At all, not one rose. It was just getting this weird like leafy growth. And I was like, what is going on? I was not sure what to do with this. So I decided to give it another year, and I'm so glad I did because look at it this year. Oh, it has been such a delight and has so many buds on it and is blooming so well. So sometimes you just need to have a little bit of patience and you definitely get rewarded for it. This here is the ROALD DAHL, which is another very popular rose by David Austin, and it starts off with these beautiful orange-red buds that open to medium-sized cup rosettes of a beautiful apricot coloring, and they are almost constantly blooming, so it's a quite robustly flowering rose, and they also have a beautiful tea fragrance. The bush is also quite healthy and it's rounded, although I have noticed that the rosettes can sometimes droop a little bit. I have been thinking that I want to put a trellis on this rose because the rosettes become so heavy. This particular plant was supposed to be a shrub rose, but sometimes it starts growing like a climbing rose, and I know this variety at David Austin also has a separate climbing rose, but I didn't buy a climbing rose, so I don't know why it does that. It starts getting these long branches, so I'm actually thinking of putting this one on a small trellis to see if that support will help it, and that's a project that I'm gonna work on this season. The last rose here that you can see is the last one from my David Austin's roses that were 5 years old is the Charlotte, and this is a beautiful rose with yellow flowers. They also start off as a much darker shade of yellow, and then as they start growing older, they fade on this almost light cream colored flower. Really, really pretty blooms. The plant is also quite bushy and has an upright growth. This is another one of those roses like the Princess Anne that didn't perform as well in the first season, or even like the first 3 years. I would say it had like sporadic blooms. But last summer and again this spring, you can see that there are so many buds on it. So I'm quite excited for it this season. I can't wait to see how it performs. I will keep you updated. But I was skeptical about this one too before. But I love these roses. I love this beautiful yellow color. It looks so pretty. It has been a delight to see these blooms. This is my Satsuma orange in full bloom. My goodness, it had so many flowers. I don't know how many of these will take and how many oranges it's gonna have, but they had a lot of blooms this spring. I planted a lot of tree roses in my garden because I wanted to create a modern cottage garden. One of the ways I wanted to do it was using these beautiful tree roses. I would 100% recommend these roses. They look so beautiful. I could have got this in a shrub form too, but just having this as form of a tree just looks unusual and absolutely beautiful. So many people have asked me about these roses. So this here is the Mary rose, and it is another David Austin rose. In my garden where I have planted this particular rose, I don't know if it is because of the microclimate. I have the ocean breeze, and whenever we have the marine layer rolling in from the ocean, it gets a little bit foggy and damp, and I'm not sure if that's the reason why, or if it is this particular rose that is more susceptible. But I have noticed that none of my other roses get it, but this one gets powdered mildew very often. And I was very frustrated with this rose last year. This rose I planted 2 years ago, and this is the first time I'm growing this variety of rose. And although these blooms are absolutely gorgeous, it's just not as disease resistant as I would like it to be. So this year I did something different, and I'm experimenting a little bit on the care, and I will let you know by the end of the season how it actually affected it and how much infection it got. So it has started off really well, and I have not seen a lot of infection other than just on one rose. But I am still keeping my fingers crossed and doing the kind of treatment that I wanted to do on this particular rose. Because I do organic gardening, I don't like a lot of chemicals in my garden, so I have to be extra careful in what varieties I choose. And this is not a variety I will recommend to everyone, especially because of the powdered mildew. I have to say this, the blooms are just utterly divine, and they smell just beautiful. And also it blooms a lot. It will bloom right from spring up until late fall. So it does bloom quite a lot, but it's just not as healthy as my other roses. This here is one of my favorite roses, and if you've seen my rose videos, you know about this. It is the distant drum rose. I love this rose, and it is so beautiful. 2 years ago, I planted it in June. Last year, this rose gave me almost 200 blooms just on one plant. It blooms non-stop. It is one of the earliest spring bloomers in my garden, and it blooms all the way up until the end of fall. Utterly gorgeous rose. Highly recommend it, and beautiful. It's got so many different shades of orange and lavender in it. Starts off as this beautiful bright orange color and turns into a gorgeous mauve lavender, and it looks like a California sunset. That's what I like to call it. A winter California sunset in a rose. I would definitely recommend this rose to anyone. I have also planted hydrangeas here, and you can see these tiny buds on these plants now. Once you go into May to, I would say, August, I just see blooms on it. Pink blooms all the time. Beautiful hydrangea. And I have about 6 plants. And this hydrangea I had planted up in the front where you saw the KALANCHOE succulents. It was right next to them, but I actually replanted them because I planted them there, and within that 1 week, they just started dying. I feel like they were going through shock. That particular area in my garden also gets a lot of sun. So I moved them here in this location where it is part shade and doesn't get a lot of sunlight, especially that lower down on the ground. And it has loved this location. So sometimes you need to experiment as to what location works the best in your own garden and try out different places. The hydrangea is called the pink splendor hydrangea, and it is a hydrangea macrophylla. This plant starts blooming in spring and then blooms repeatedly through summer. Looks utterly beautiful. The one thing I would recommend about planting your hydrangeas is plant them in part shade, especially where it's not getting a ton of sunlight, because it doesn't do that well in scorching sun. And I would recommend looking for a spot which has more shade and like just a few hours of sunshine, and it will do a lot better. I have for the first time ever seen blood oranges on a tree, and this is another plant that I planted. These are the first oranges that I have had from this tree, and I am planning to harvest them soon so I can use them to create something special. Maybe in one of the next videos we can harvest them. This rose here is one of the roses I have planted right up in the front, and it is again a tree rose. It is called the Easy Spirit Rose with these beautiful cream colored white blooms, huge blooms. Once this flower blooms, it is as big as my face. And I always say that when I talk about this flower because I can't believe it. It is huge. I love it. The very showy, beautiful flowers, light scent. After the Olivia Rose Austin, this is actually the second one that bloomed in my garden. It starts very early in spring, and within like the first week or so I had blooms, and goes right up until December. The only reason why this stops blooming is because I have to prune it so that it can bloom better for the next season. And usually I do my pruning in December or early Jan, first week of Jan, here in zone 10A, and that is the only reason why this flower will stop blooming, but otherwise it just constantly blooms. I am growing this garden in zone 10A in Southern California. I also live near the ocean, so I get a lot of the ocean breeze and the marine layer, which is like a fog layer that comes from the ocean. Anytime the inland heats up, we have this fog that gets pulled in from the ocean, and that actually creates different microclimates here in California. I would definitely suggest looking at your own microclimates to decide which plants to plant, and honestly just experiment, try out different things, because until you try stuff out, you're never gonna know. I have tried things out and some things work and some things don't. I hope you have an amazing time gardening. Hope you grow lots of flowers and lots of vegetables, and good luck, and thank you, and have an amazing, amazing day. Bye-bye.